With that, we're going to get started on the afternoon session. Our first speaker is Cody Bakker. Cody's been working on a couple of projects. One is a strip trial program, and the other one is looking at some of the top growers in our co-op and what are they doing. And he's going to give us an update on that. So, Cody.
Thank you. And I would like to say that it is really nice to see a crowd this big. We like to see these kind of turnouts for our events here, so thank you all for coming. I'll try to make this worth your while. Like Todd said, I've been working on a few projects, and the strip trial program that I've been trying to develop isn't really a dedicated program. I'd like to give our growers the opportunity to develop their own protocol, maybe bounce that protocol off of our agriculturalists and our research staff, and potentially execute a program that'll help facilitate those trials for them. The other thing I did was kind of dive into what gets our top 10 growers producing at that higher performance level. How are they able to consistently be in that top 10 range? And I did learn some things, so we'll get into it. So why do we do strip trials in the first place? Maybe we want to try to validate some of those things that are tested by our research staff, by extension staff, or any third-party company that comes with a claim saying X product or X practice does this on your farm. So we have that ability to run a strip trial on any given farm, and it's all about recording the data properly to make sure that we can actually get some decent results to prove something and say that, okay, this is probably going to work on my farm. Within a strip trial, we get that larger size, that larger variability throughout the field. If I have a 2,200 foot long strip in my field, 12 rows wide, I'm getting just as much variability through the pass of that strip as I am in multiple replicates of small plot trial work. So it's just another way to get another look at some of these variables that we want to test. Sometimes those results in the strip trials are going to deviate a little bit from what we see in small plot work. Sometimes they're going to back up and bolster the results that we might be getting in those trials. If we're testing for a single variable like variety, any other input here, if single variables are really, really easy to test in a strip trial. We need to make sure that we have that valid protocol going into it and making sure that we're managing all of the other conditions. Maybe we want to prove something for ourselves on our farm, like I said, we just have to set it up carefully. Before going into that, we want to make sure if something's worth testing. If I have 3 years worth of data from our research staff showing that something is not significant, maybe I don't want to waste my time bothering trying that product on the farm. Maybe it'll pay off, but it's good to give our growers that option. Our growers have always had that option, and what I'm developing is just going to help set that up for them. Oftentimes I've had growers ask me, why didn't this product work for me? We tried X product for 5 years and never saw a difference. My response would immediately be, well, did you leave a check strip? Oftentimes the answer was no. Okay, well, how can I compare X versus Y if I'm not comparing it next to A, to the standard condition in the field, leaving the conditions the same as everything set up in the rest of the test? They don't need to be complicated setting these up. It just takes that little bit of forethought to get to that point. So an example of a single variable trial here, our agriculturalists set up variety strip trials every year. We get varieties from our research staff that are going to be valid entries for us to look at, and it'll give growers another tool while they're making seed ordering decisions. The agriculturalists have conducted these strip trials for over 20 years, so we've got a good method to be able to record this data and not mess them up. We've got a very good protocol we've developed, and we do get reliable data out of it to be able to use for other decisions. Another variable we can look at is something like a nitrogen rate. If I want to look at a difference in nitrogen rate in a side dress application, then I have that opportunity if my side dress toolbar can apply different rates. So Ryberg Farms actually executed this trial right here this fall, and we went through harvest. It was nice to see that how well this trial was set up just on the grower level. He set up 2 reps with 4 treatments, and we were able to see that the trial was looking good enough, and we were actually seeing physical response in this trial that we knew was going to lead to some good data. We want to make sure that we're recording relevant field information. So if we get past harvest and we're trying to analyze the results of any given strip trial, if there looks like there might be some odd variability in the data, we want to make sure that, okay, I need to look back and make sure that I have all these things recorded, that maybe this application or this other condition makes sense as to why I have some variability in the trial. So these are the results from his trial, and the results are not the key here, but the key is that the data was kept, managed, and recorded properly, so we were able to get to this point. I went out to take extra samples, quality lab samples, out of each one of those strips, so we're able to have a little bit more robust data set and not solely relying on the truckloads that were delivered for this strip trial. You can see that there's 4 different treatments, 0 through 30 gallons per acre of a 32% UAN, and we were able to see some statistically significant results for extractable sugar. And like I said, it was a well-performed trial, and that'll allow their given farm to maybe dial in where they want to be for their rate based on the results that they've gathered from this trial. I'd like to throw in, too, that keep in mind this is in a strip till scenario. These rates and these practices don't always apply across the board to a conventional tillage scenario also. I swear my fingers work. It's not, I don't think it's me. They're trying to advance. I'm not trying to redesign the strip trial process. I want to allow growers to have this option. I'm not promoting that you do a set protocol, that you have to hit the field in exactly this order of steps. All I'm creating is a tool. So how this would work is the grower says to their agriculturalist, I want to do a strip trial for X product, and I want to do 4 strips or whatever number of strips you want to have. So they would request to their grower a set of tickets that we'll print out. It's going to look just like a tear ticket, any other barcoded ticket, or like a field ticket, a field card in your truck. When they set up their strip trial, they're going to assign their strips to those specific cards, taking those cards out to the field with them. If they want to have extra quality samples like I took in the Ryberg trial, I can assign those before we get out there and make sure that they're going to be taken from the correct strips, and we don't misconstrue that data and mix it up with any other strips. The driver of that load then, after we harvest that strip, takes that dedicated ticket for that load to the scale house, and they just scan it at the scale with their ticket, with their field card. We don't have to worry about the grower having to call the agriculturalist, call the scale house. We got to make sure we record this data correctly. Don't lose the ticket number as the truck leaves the scale. It'll all be recorded in a database, a separate table. It'll be hidden in the background up until the point that we need to call that data back. We don't even have to worry about extra people having their hands on it to mix up the data. Just a brief example of what a table for this data entry would look like for the growers. I'm working on this model with IT to put this tool on the portal for growers to access. So I need the ticket number. The grower can enter the treatment option that they have for that strip. I need the strip length in feet and the width in feet for that strip, and any extra quality sample tickets that were taken for extra samples going into that. They'll get a table back with the results, and this is a example here just showing what a grower would enter up on top and the results being kicked back. It's going to automatically pull from our TareLab TareLab quality sample file, and as well as the grower load ticket data file, and combine all that data to give us the results that we see here. You'll automatically get an Estisa comparison right away of your strip trial. So again, this is just an addition of a tool. I'm not changing strip trials themselves, and the harvest process is going to stay the same. It's just less people to worry about having to make a mistake. And if a grower wants to conduct these trials, that's great. If we have 200 of these trials, perfect. If we have 2 or 10 of them, that'd be great too. But if we have as many as you guys want to do, that's just fine. Depending on how you execute them, depending on which products or practices you want to test, they may or may not be endorsed by SMBSC, but we just wanted to create this tool to make it useful for you. Again, it's a work in progress, but the reports are already in place. All this is doing is pulling data from a few different reports to compile for you. It should be ready to roll by the start of pre-pile. Now on to the top 10%. So before I started in this role, my predecessor, Steve Rail, looked into this data set a little bit, and we wanted to make sure that if we were going to compare operations, we got to have everybody on the same playing field. And when he was developing the Estisa model for comparison, we found that that was a really good model to use year to year. It didn't have deviations to different conditions about a given year's payment. It was going to be an even comparison model going forward. So we wanted to use a 5-year data set, and this included 5,000 fields and over 500,000 acres. So it's not just, okay, they stumbled into the top 10 because this year was better than the last. This is, it is a big enough data set to make sure that we're well informed to call these guys truly in the top 10%. Ranked by Estisa again, I'm going to go through that in a bit to make sure everybody understands where that came from. The database reporting that we've done in the past, so every year for contracting, the growers would meet with their agriculturalists. They might get a field sheet that shows their ranking. And you'd get a ranking by district and a ranking by the cooperative level, how your field did. How we group those operations, the agriculturalists have always worked with Jody to group them the same, make sure that we don't have multiple contracts combined that, okay, these guys don't grow together, we're not grouping them together. If you got a couple brothers in an operation that are farming together, doing everything the same, then we're grouping them together based on that operation. So there's give or take 200 total. So we decided to take the top 10% of those operations. And I started to just call the list. I wanted to go through a process where I was collecting a few tidbits of information at a time. There's 20 operations. It takes a little bit of time to get through, but it wasn't terrible. And one of the biggest things that I went into this with was I wanted to make sure that, okay, if we do find some secrets in this process, or if we do get into something that is truly going to help move the needle for the rest of our grower base, I still want to treat it respectfully that these growers are our best, and I want to treat their privacy accordingly to make sure that I'm doing this in the right light. Everybody would want to guess, maybe they'd have a secret or two. These operations are doing something. They've got a silver bullet to figure things out. It's not really the kind that you think. For the most part, all of these top 10 operations are following SMBSC programs. Everybody in the co-op's got a slight deviation here and there, and the top 10 are no different. They've tweaked things in the programs, how they fit in their operation. They're doing things very similar. They've got the same equipment and the same limitations that every other grower has. For Estisa, the model that we use for this, so when Steve developed this iteration, there were several iterations. I believe this was the fourth or fifth, maybe sixth iteration before it was finally settled upon that this model was going to very, very closely correlate to our grower payment. And it didn't fluctuate from year to year. It is a 3-to-1 quality to ton ratio. So we're using our extractable sugar numbers in this to come up with a relative batting average, if you want to look at it in that light. If we're hitting 1,000 in here, we're top of the line. That's a really high yielding field, pretty high sugar. Out of the 11,000 fields that went into this huge data set to prove this out, the 500 Estisa score was right smack dab in the middle. So it's a good way to think of it, something like a batting average. So that's what we're looking at when I say somebody's in the top 10. They've got our highest Estisa scores possible. And who are these guys? They possess a very intentional management mindset. And what I mean is that they're taking that huge focus, putting it into not just single variables, but their whole farm operation. They've got long rotation plans. Of course, things change, give or take 5 years and 10 years, but they've got plans for their rotations several years out. The agronomy programs that everybody's making right now, you've got your plan going forward into this year. You've got that made well in advance, but these guys have a near perfect plan in place already that they're going to be executing come this spring and summer. When I was interviewing these guys, it was evident that I wouldn't have all the answers because these guys have already figured a lot of things out. But they're always trying to ask questions to try to improve their operation. They're not just getting complacent. Okay, I'm growing X Estisa score. I'm doing the best I possibly can. Now I can just hit cruise for a while. They're not doing that. They're always asking me hard questions that oftentimes I didn't have answers to. They put the highest focus and emphasis on their pattern, tile, and tillage. It's probably not a surprise, but I am going to dive into those things in a little bit here too. And the beets are their highest crop priority in their operation, and they're also their highest and best opportunity crop. So where do these guys grow their best crops? Well, let me show you. Right here, in God's country. You would think that maybe there's going to be some relative distribution. Maybe all these growers are isolated into a few townships, counties. I'll tell you that that's not the case. I know Steve started digging into this a few years ago, and I dug a little deeper to see, does the distribution change as we go from the top 20 operations, top 30, 40, 50? When we dug into that, we still found that the grower groups at those levels are still really well distributed, but the top 20 operations represent all 8 agriculturalist districts within the cooperative. What's the history of ranking these top growers? So there was really never a program put in place to analyze what these guys are doing. It was just simply looking at the rankings. We want to see who's at the top, maybe who's in the middle, who's at the bottom. There's always going to be a top 10 and there's always going to be a bottom 10. But back in 2004, I believe the research staff at the time put together a book that showed 2003 and 2004 crop years. And back then we didn't have the Estisa score model developed to give a good year-to-year ranking, but ESA has given us a pretty good indication of where these guys were growing. And did they share any commonalities? Were they doing things back then how we're doing things now? Sure. Some of those practices haven't changed. Probably a little more pattern tile, probably a few more of this and that, but the one thing that was very evident is that there is no member of the current top 20 operations, there's no operation in there that was in the top 20 operations in 2004. So it proves that operations do definitely have latitude, and if we continue to follow this model of tracking operations using the Estesa score to rank them, I believe we'll still see latitude on any given year. Somebody's going to move in and somebody's going to move out. So do these operations have a silver bullet? We're not really relying on one variable, give or take, to get us there. The top 10 operations aren't putting all that emphasis on one variable. If you get that tunnel vision on one single variable, if it comes time to make your first fungicide application, your first planter pass, I'm going out there, I might as well throw another product in. It's easy to get tunnel vision on some of those products. Rather than looking back, zooming out, making sure that I'm not forgetting about all the other things I did with my tillage, my planter settings, anything else that affects that whole operation and that whole beet field. All of the inputs matter, some big, some small. So why would we try forcing one of those variables to do the work for us when the whole picture is what matters? Starter and foliar products are easy for this, that, okay, yeah, they're helping us for sure. We want them in the operation if they play a part. Tillage and planter stuff, that always plays a part too. It's big and small, but 0.1% improvement in a lot of areas is moving the needle quite a bit, but adding 5 to 10% in small areas could be moving it the same. Top 10 growers have a realistic, in reality, they have a combination of both of those. What are the top 10 guys doing that's the same? For the rest of the co-op, the sugar content is effectively the same. Again, remember that this is a 5-year data set, 5,000 fields. So there's not going to be a lot of variability that's going to affect this. Purity is the same. Rotation years, I would think that, maybe we'd see a little bit longer in the top 10, but it's the same. The last delivery date, if we're letting things sugar up, ton up a little bit more, maybe that's how they're getting to the top 10. One day isn't making that difference. Same thing with planting date. One day is not really moving the needle on that. But what's different? 3.5 ton per acre. So this is what's driving the Estesa score to be that much higher. Part of those tons per acre is likely coming from the stand count. If I have 3,600 more plants per acre at the time of harvest, it's a lot more beets to put in the truck, and that's going to drive my yield up. And in this case, I would bet that that's a high correlation to that 3.5 ton above. %, more pattern tiled acres. And this is likely a huge deal, and it's likely not a surprise, leading to a 87-point difference in Estesa score. When this correlates that well with our payment, with our grower payment, that's quite a few more dollars over especially a 5-year period when you look at this data set. The biggest factors are tillage and pattern tile, so I just want to go over a few examples here. One of the trends that I saw when I was talking to these top 10 guys, maybe some of these guys still plow, maybe some of these guys are moving to a new high-speed disking ripping program. The top 10 is no different than the rest of the cooperative. There's still a general trend going away from moldboard plowing, and it's mostly labor related, but it's the same for everybody. If we don't do a good job plowing, we're not accomplishing the goals that we need to for tillage. If I'm not breaking down that residue, chopping it up and getting it uniformly mixed in the soil profile, then I got to look at doing something else. There's a lot of sulfurs that have entered the picture the last 10 years or so, and they're doing great things for our sugar beet crop. They're getting things chopped up and mixed properly in the way that we want to see them done. I've pointed out before that what I'm doing with a 2100 or a 4100 sulfur is vastly different than what I'm doing with a 5200 sulfur. So if I want to set up a seed bed, if I have all that residue left, the 70% of our acres following field corn, if I want to set up a good seed bed, I've got to be sizing up that trash, especially in high-yielding corn scenarios. And I've got the difference of what I call a first-generation ripper. If I've got a 530B or a 2700 Deere versus an 875 in the bottom right there, they're two completely different machines. I think all of our beet growers know it, and I don't see a lot of those first-generation types running anymore. There's a lot of high-speed discs that have entered the picture. I do think they have a valuable place in setting up a seed bed for beets. I haven't really dialed that in. One thing that our ag staff, our whole ag department kind of misses out on is the best tillage for setting up a good beet seed bed is done usually in October. What do we have going on in October? Trying to put beets in the pile, trying to keep a crew happy, trying to button things up so that we make sure we get that beet storage the way that it needs to be. So we oftentimes don't get out to the field to see what these differences are. So I wanted to look at some fields that were set up really nice for beets in 24 here. If I have a canning crop, I don't have a lot of residue left to deal with. A 5200 is going to do way more than I need it to. I'm getting really good mixing and chopping up of that residue. Those fields will be a one-pass tillage deal in the spring. The one on the right is an aggressive example of high-yielding field corn. So I've got a lot of trash out there. I got to make sure I'm going to be okay in the spring. So they hit this with 5 passes, 2 passes with the 5200, ripped twice, and then sulfured it back. And they admitted to me that this was a aggressive option, and I agreed. But nevertheless, it was basically set up to be a great seed bed in the spring. Some more normal operations, what I would consider, would be maybe I'm hitting something with a high-speed disc, some vertical tillage first, then ripping. This has gotten to be a lot more common, and with heavier rippers like an 875 or a 2730, I'm able to do a lot better job of stratifying that material at depth. And then also making sure that, okay, if I'm operating that implement correctly, I'm getting good leveling done also. If I'm hitting a vertical tillage tool first on that field, chopping up that residue and then mixing it in with the ripper, that's setting us up to have an awesome seed bed in the spring. These are 1 pass each. The 2 on the right was just inverted, ripper first and disc first. If I have really high yielding corn, then if baling's an option for me, if I got to get rid of my residue for bedding or whatever, 1 pass after that looks pretty good too. If I'm using a 2730, I'm going to make things look pretty good with just 1 pass if I don't have all that residue to deal with. If it's not baled off and I have all that residue, 2 passes is really what it takes. 1 pass is not even going to come close to getting rid of 250 bushel corn trash. When it comes to pattern tile, we've always tracked our fields. The agriculturalists would ask the growers every year at contracting time, was this field pattern tiled? And they've always had a relative standard that if 75% of the field was pattern tiled, then we said yes. Anything less than that, we'd mark it no. So of course, beets prefer a cool and dry climate. That excess moisture will create an uneven moisture level. It's going to give us a high water table, some goofy looking roots. They're going to be slow to come out of excess moisture conditions. More potential for root rot, leaf spot, and if we got to push and pull through harvest, it's no fun. If we get a couple 4 inches in September, that's going to make life difficult. Ultimately, we're reducing yield. So out of all these years, we had a 2.5 ton advantage in our whole cooperative data set. The thing to point out, though, is that the least advantage of having pattern tile was in 2016. We still had a 2/3 of a ton advantage to having pattern tile. This isn't just top 10, this is the whole data set, every field in the cooperative. And if I'm getting a give or take a 50-point swing in a crop year like 2023, then I know that my pattern tile is still paying off. All of the top 10 growers possess a dedicated management mindset. This isn't just, okay, I've got my plan, I'm going to show up and jump in the tractor today, this is what I was going to do today. It's every day is well thought out, every operation is well thought out, and they're dedicated to staying with that program. It's not just about investing time in yourself and what that plan is. You've got to put that thought and time into the right equipment, the right people. And a lot of these top 10 operations were very successful because of the people that they have in their operation. It's not just I'm the show, I run the farm here. I've got one or two guys that help me out, but no, these guys are critical to the success of their operations. Investing money in the right place, they're not just throwing their checkbook at it. You know, you can solve a lot of problems with money, but to maintain that top performance level, that money has to be invested in the right place. They're not cutting corners at any given point in the operation. They're always moving the needle and striving to be on top. And the top 10 know that success is not always what you see. And with that, do I have time for a question? Quick question. Anybody have a quick question? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Cody.